Right now, there is a loud consensus that Silicon Valley is losing its mind. The media is calling it AI psychosis, this assumption that executives are blinded by flawless, small-scale AI prototypes and are forcing them onto companies before they're actually ready. Box CEO Aaron Levy recently pointed out that leaders are easily mesmerized by what he calls the happy path of AI demos. They see an agent write a perfect email in 10 seconds, but they miss the dense friction involved in integrating that agent into the last mile of actual daily corporate work. For the person executing that daily work, the reality is often messy. Employees are dealing with disjointed tools, heavier workloads from context switching, and AI copilots that sometimes create more bottlenecks than they solve. Curious. So we have to ask the obvious question: are tech executives completely hallucinating the value of this technology? Or are the skeptics misreading a much larger strategic timeline? The skeptics actually have rigorous economic data on their side. Recent meta-analyses from institutions like UC Berkeley and the National Bureau of Economic Research show no robust immediate relationship between broad AI adoption and aggregate economic gains. This chart shows exactly what economists call the productivity paradox. The blue line represents the widespread rollout of corporate AI, but the gray line at the bottom represents measured aggregate productivity, and it is completely flat. We are deploying billions of dollars of technology, but the measurable output isn't moving. If you look at this gaping discrepancy between the hype and the output, you find the daily grind of worker friction. That flat line is the physical time lost to poorly integrated systems, checking AI hallucinations and reorganizing processes on the fly. Looking exclusively at these numbers, diagnosing leadership with a collective delusion makes sense. But that assumes the goal is to optimize for the next quarterly earnings report, rather than preparing for a significant macroeconomic shift. Every general-purpose technology has a lag phase. When heavy steam power and electricity first entered factories, early adoption did not spike productivity on day one. We saw the exact same flatline when early mainframe computing arrived. Installing the hardware was easy, but getting human beings to figure out how to operate it took years. Those early desktops caused significant organizational friction. They forced entirely new workflows and clunky processes, and for a long time, the economic numbers lagged behind the reality on the ground, until those machines eventually enabled entirely new categories of global business. What a short-term observer calls a failed software rollout, an economic historian recognizes as the standard, predictable friction of building a new foundation. The delay exists because technology is instantly downloadable, but structural architecture is not. Rewiring how a company operates, changing its policies, roles, and incentives to capture the upside of automation, takes years of adjustment. An analyst might suggest waiting until the software is perfect to avoid that pain, but enterprise executives know that in a highly competitive global market, choosing to wait is choosing to become totally irrelevant. You have to start the rewiring process now. Take the global payroll company Remote. They decided to look past the early friction of AI agents and completely restructure how their internal teams operate. By utilizing systems like the Model Context Protocol, their autonomous agents now handle substantial volumes of secure, cross-platform data. The result is that Remote recently crossed $300 million in annual recurring revenue and achieved a 50% increase in revenue per employee, decoupling their financial growth from their headcount. These leaders are acutely aware of the friction their teams are experiencing. They are consciously choosing to endure that short-term chaos because they understand the alternative is long-term extinction. When you successfully automate base-level execution, things like compliance tracking, initial code drafting, and manual data entry, at 100 times the normal speed, the entire structure of the company warps. This diagram illustrates a phenomenon called the executive authorization bottleneck. When software can generate 1,000 drafts or strategies instantly, the physical constraint of the company immediately shifts upward. The problem is no longer producing the work. The problem is authorizing it. To clear that traffic jam, the human role moves from the bottom of the funnel to the top. Instead of spending hours creating a single raw output, an employee spends minutes reviewing and curating dozens of automated options. AI forces the cost of baseline production down to nearly zero, and because the execution is practically free, human judgment becomes the single most valuable asset in the entire system. Every time an automated agent takes over a repetitive administrative task, it represents an opportunity cost recovered for humanity. We are finally being forced to migrate up the value chain to the work that actually requires a mind. This graphic shows where that migration leads. The first domain we have to move toward is synthetic intelligence. This is the ability to exercise high-level judgment, design complex organizational architectures, and connect strategy across wildly different disciplines. Algorithms can summarize data, but they cannot invent novel business strategies. The second and equally critical domain is emotional intelligence. Agents excel in the closed vacuum of a prompt window, but they are entirely blind to corporate culture, unspoken market nuances, and genuine trust. Innovation requires an intuitive read of human behavior that software simply cannot replicate. The most practical thing you can do right now is stop asking if a large language model is going to take your job. Instead, audit your weekly tasks, delegate predictable patterns to the software, and train your judgment and empathy. The productivity paradox represents a forced intellectual upgrade. By automating the mechanical tasks that once held us back, we place an absolute premium on human ingenuity.